Tonight, we explore what happens when the smartest witch of her age lands in the last place anyone would expect. What if the Sorting Hat, sensing something deeper than Hermione Granger's hunger for knowledge, placed her not in Gryffindor, but in Slytherin? What does it mean for a Muggle-born girl to survive inside the house that despises everything she is? And what happens to Harry Potter, to Ron Weasley, and to the war itself when the person who was supposed to hold them all together is fighting a battle they can't see, in a common room they'll never enter? In this version of the story, Hermione doesn't just have to be the brightest, she has to be the most dangerous. Because in Slytherin, those are the same thing. The hat had been on her head for 11 seconds when it made the decision that would reshape the wizarding world. Hermione Granger did not know this. She knew the hat was taking longer than she expected, which was distressing in itself because she had read about the sorting in Hogwarts a history, and the text described the process as typically brief and largely ceremonial, a formality that confirmed what the hat already knew. 11 seconds was not brief. 11 seconds was the hat finding something it had not expected to find. What it found was this: ambition. Not the visible, stated kind. Not the ambition of a girl who wanted to be top of the class and did not mind if everyone knew it. Something rawer. Something that lived beneath the keenness to learn and the relentless preparation and the stack of additional reading she had completed before the term even began. The ambition of a child who had spent her entire life being the smartest person in every room she entered, and who had been told, in 1,000 small and large ways, that this was a problem. That intelligence in a girl was inconvenient, that knowing more than the teacher was rude, that her hand went up too fast and too often and the other children didn't like it. Hermione Granger had spent 11 years being told that her greatest quality was her most irritating quality. And the thing that lived underneath that, the thing the hat found when it went deeper, past the love of learning, past the need for approval, past the desperate hope that here, in this magical world, she would finally find people who understood her, was a fury so cold and so structural that the hat recognized it immediately. Not anger. Strategy. The quiet, patient, meticulous strategy of a person who has been underestimated so many times that she has stopped being surprised by it and started using it. Interesting, the hat said. Very interesting. Which house? Hermione thought, because Hermione was constitutionally incapable of waiting. You would do well in Gryffindor. The courage is real. The loyalty is genuine. The instinct to protect is bone deep. But, you have been protecting yourself since long before you arrived here. And the tool you use to protect yourself is not a sword. It is a mind. And minds like yours, Miss Granger, minds that see the full board, that calculate consequences 3 moves ahead, that refuse to be outmaneuvered, those minds belong to one house above all others. Slytherin, Hermione thought. Not with resistance, with recognition. Yes, not because you are cruel, not because you are selfish, but because you are, at your core, a person who intends to win, not for the glory, not for the applause. Because you understand, you have always understood, that the people who change the world are the ones who are still standing at the end of it. And a Muggle born in Slytherin will either transform the house or be consumed by it. I believe the former. But the choice is yours. Then put me there, Hermione said. I don't want the easy path. One more thing, the hat said. What? The easy path and the right path are not always different. Be careful not to mistake suffering for virtue. Being in the hard house does not make you more worthy. It makes you more tested. The test is the opportunity. Whether you use it correctly is up to you. I understand. I suspect you do. You have been understanding things correctly since before you were old enough to know you were doing it. A pause. Don't let that stop you from being surprised. Slytherin. The great hall did not erupt. It rippled. A murmur moved through the student body like a stone dropped in still water, spreading outward in concentric rings of confusion. At the Slytherin table, faces turned to look at the small girl with bushy hair climbing down from the stool. At the Gryffindor table, a red-haired boy with freckles leaned over to whisper something to a dark-haired boy with glasses and a scar. At the staff table, Albus Dumbledore set down his goblet. Not in shock. Dumbledore did not shock easily. In recalibration. The blue eyes moved to the green and silver table where Hermione Granger was walking, chin up, to a seat at the far end of the Slytherin bench, and something behind those eyes shifted. A new variable. An unexpected variable. The kind that, in Dumbledore's experience, had a tendency to become the most important variable of all. Beside him, Severus Snape was very still. The first night was the test that Hermione had not studied for. This was a novel experience. Hermione had studied for everything. She had read the standard textbooks twice, the supplementary texts once, and 3 books that were not on any list but that contained information she had determined was likely to be useful. She had prepared for potions and charms and transfiguration and the social dynamics of a new school and the particular challenges of entering a world she had not grown up in. She had not prepared for this. The Slytherin common room was underground, which she had known from Hogwarts, a history. What the book had not conveyed was the specific quality of the silence. It was not a quiet silence. It was a watching silence. The silence of a room full of people who are assessing a new arrival with the efficiency of people for whom assessment is survival. 23 pairs of eyes. All on her. Hermione sat in the chair she had chosen, second from the door, sight-line to the fire, back to the wall. The position that gave her the most information about the most exits, and met every gaze in turn. Not defiantly, precisely, the way you meet the eyes of people who need to know you are not afraid even when you are. Granger, said a voice. Draco Malfoy. Pale, pointed, already wearing the Slytherin crest with the proprietary confidence of someone who considers the house a birthright. Hermione Granger. Yes, your parents are muggles. Dentists, specifically. They work with teeth. I know it's not the point you were going to make. I'm establishing context. Yes, I'm muggle-born. Yes, the hat put me in Slytherin. I assume you have thoughts about this. I have several. Save them. We'll be sharing a house for 7 years. There's time. A silence. Then, from across the room, a laugh. Single, sharp, involuntary, Blaise Zabini, leaning against the mantelpiece with the elaborate casualness of someone performing relaxation for an audience. She's quick. I'm accurate, Hermione said. Quick is a different quality. She's accurate, Zabini amended. Draco looked at her. Grey eyes. Calculating, not hostile yet, which was, Hermione noted, a choice. Hostility would have been easier. Would have been the obvious response, would have been what the ideology demanded. But he was not deploying it, yet meant he was doing what she was doing. Assessing? The bed near the window is mine, said a girl on the other side of the room. Daphne Greengrass. Blonde. Careful posture, the kind of pretty that came from being taught to deploy prettiness as a social tool. The one near the door is available. Thank you, Hermione said. Don't thank me. It's the coldest spot in the room. The draught comes under the door. I'll manage the draught. I'm sure you will. Daphne went back to her book, but as she turned the page, she glanced at Hermione once more. A glance that was not hostile and was not warm, but that was, unmistakably, interested. Hermione unpacked her trunk. Made her bed. Set her books on the nightstand in the order she intended to read them, and lay in the cold spot near the door with the draught moving under it, and the green light of the lake shifting on the ceiling, and the quiet, terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that the test had begun before she even arrived. She told Ron and Harry the next morning, before breakfast, on the stairs. "Slytherin," Harry said. "Yes? How?" "The hat sorted me. That's how everyone gets sorted." "But why?" "Because I have qualities the hat considers Slytherin. I don't expect this to affect our friendship. I expect it will be inconvenient for approximately 2 weeks, and then people will adapt." Ron was staring at her. His freckled face was doing something complicated. The processing of multiple conflicting pieces of information, none of which fit the model he had been given by his older brothers, all of whom had been Gryffindors, all of whom had provided him with a very clear picture of what Slytherin was and what it contained. "You're not like them," Ron said. "I was sorted into the same house." "That's different from being like them. Slytherin is the house of... I know what it's the house of. Historically, that history isn't an immutable fact about everyone who enters it. It's a pattern that can be changed. By you? By someone. I would prefer it to be me." Harry looked at her. The green eyes were steady, curious, already past the shock and into the analysis, a quality that Hermione appreciated about Harry, that he moved through surprise quickly and arrived at interest. "Still friends?" Harry asked. "Obviously, but you need to understand something. In Slytherin, alliances matter. The house monitors its members. What I say at the Gryffindor table during breakfast will be noted, analysed, and potentially used. I will be careful. You should be careful too." "That sounds exhausting," Ron said. "It sounds strategic, which is a different thing. Can't we just be normal friends who eat breakfast together?" "We can eat breakfast together, but normal is a description of what other people do. We're going to have to be more deliberate than that." Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. Then Harry said, "All right, deliberate friends." "Fine, thank you," Hermione said. "You're going to be terrifying in that house," Ron said. "I mean that as a compliment. I know you do. That's why I'm keeping you." The first lesson of Slytherin was the one nobody taught explicitly. It was a lesson about information. Not the magical kind, not the textbook kind, but the social kind. The currency of the house was not galleons or grades or the approval of teachers. It was knowledge. Who knew what about whom? What had been said to whom and in which context and with what implication? The intricate, invisible, constantly updating map of alliances and debts and histories that governed every interaction in the common room, at the table, in the corridors. Hermione was, by the end of the second week, the most informed first year in the house. This was not because she spied. It was because she listened. Hermione Granger had spent 11 years being the odd one out in every social situation she entered, and the experience had given her the same skill that all outsiders develop: the ability to observe without being observed. To sit at the edge of a conversation and absorb its entire content while appearing to read a book. To catalogue dynamics and allegiances and the precise hierarchy of a social group from the quality of how people entered rooms. She sat. She watched. She read books that were not the books she appeared to be reading. And by the end of the second week, she had constructed a complete model of Slytherin's first-year social landscape. Draco Malfoy was the centre, not because he was liked. Malfoy was not liked so much as orbited. The gravitational field created by his name and his money, and the particular confidence of someone who has never had cause to doubt their own importance. Crabbe and Goyle were satellites. Pansy Parkinson was a close ally who had decided Draco was her best investment. Zabini was independent, maintaining distance from Malfoy's orbit while acknowledging its mass. Nott was quiet, watchful, carrying something private. And Daphne Greengrass was the most interesting. Because Daphne did not fit the model cleanly. She was pure blood, which should have placed her in Malfoy's orbit. She was intelligent, which should have placed her with Zabini's studied neutrality. But Daphne occupied a space of her own, polished, composed, reading more than she spoke, and speaking with a precision that suggested every word was chosen rather than merely produced. Hermione made a decision. Not about Draco. About Daphne. Mahogany and unicorn hair? Hermione said, sitting beside Daphne at breakfast on the third week. Daphne looked up from her book. I'm sorry? Your wand. Mahogany and unicorn hair. I noticed the grip pattern when you cast the levitation charm in class. Ollivander recommends that combination for people with a strong affinity for precision-based magic. Daphne looked at her for a long moment. I was going to say the same thing about your wand. Vinewood. 10 3/4 inches. How did you the sound it makes when you swish it? Vinewood has a slightly lighter resonance than most, and you hold it like you understand exactly what it can do, which is unusual for a first year. Hermione considered this. That's a remarkable observation. I'm a greengrass. We're taught to observe. What are you taught to do with what you observe? Keep it until it's useful. That's very Slytherin. You're very Slytherin. Despite what Malfoy has been saying, Hermione's expression remained neutral. What has Malfoy been saying? That you don't belong here. That a mudblood in Slytherin is an embarrassment. That the hat made an error. What do you think? Daphne returned to her book. I think the hat doesn't make errors. And I think Draco Malfoy is 13 years old and has never had to be right about anything because his name did it for him. When that changes, she turned a page, he'll discover that being right matters. Is that an alliance? That's an observation. Alliances come later, when both parties have enough information. How much information do you need? More than 3 weeks. Hermione nodded, picked up her own book. Read. The draught from the door moved against her robes. The draught, Daphne said, without looking up. There's a warming charm. Second chapter of the Practical Household Spellbook. I placed the charm on my own bed in the first week. You haven't because you didn't want to use magic before you'd mastered the regulation versions. That's... Hermione stopped. Started again. Yes, caution in deploying ability is a Slytherin quality, not a Gryffindor one. What's the Gryffindor quality? Demonstrating ability immediately, loudly, and at personal risk. Hermione considered this. Then she cast the warming charm on her robes. Perfectly? First try. Daphne smiled. She had a particular smile, small, private, the smile of someone who has confirmed a hypothesis. More than 3 weeks, Daphne said, but fewer than 5. Draco Malfoy came to her on the 4th week. Not in the common room, where appearances had to be maintained. In the corridor outside the charms classroom, where the traffic was thin and the castle was large, and a conversation could happen in the crevice between the public and the private. Granger, Hermione was walking to Transfiguration. She stopped. Turned. Draco was alone. Crabbe and Goyle were nowhere in evidence, which meant this was not a performance. This was, Hermione noted, one of the more significant pieces of information she had gathered about Draco Malfoy, that when he was not performing, he was different. Smaller, more uncertain. A boy, rather than an archetype. Malfoy, I want to understand something. That's an unusual opening. I'm trying something unusual. The standard opening? He stopped. Something flickered across his face. I'm trying to have a conversation that is not already scripted. Hermione waited. Why Slytherin? Draco asked. The hat could have put you anywhere. Everyone knows you're Gryffindor material. Brave, loyal, insufferably principled. Why did you choose this? How do you know I chose? Because you have the expression of someone who chose. When people get sorted into places they didn't want, they look lost. When they get sorted into places they chose, they look like they're beginning. Hermione looked at him. That is surprisingly perceptive. I grew up in a house where reading people was a survival skill. Why Slytherin? Granger. Because the world is not going to hand me anything, Hermione said. I am Muggle-born. I am female. I am 11 years old, and I know more about magic than most of the adults in my life. In the wizarding world, as I understand it from what I've read, every one of those things is a liability. Gryffindor would have given me companions for the battle. Slytherin gives me the tools to win it. Draco stared at her. You just described the ideology of this house better than most people who were born into it. I read about it. Extensively. There are people who will make your life very difficult here. There are people who have made my life very difficult everywhere I've ever been. I've learnt to use that. Use it how? By being so indisputably excellent that the difficulty becomes irrelevant. By making myself so useful, so knowledgeable, so demonstrably capable that removing me from a situation would make the situation worse for everyone involved, including the people who wish I wasn't there. Draco was quiet for a moment. Processing, the grey eyes, which Hermione had noted were more expressive than their owner intended, were cycling through something complex. That's not Gryffindor, Draco said. No, it isn't. He stopped. Slytherin, Hermione finished. Yes, I know. Draco looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that she had not expected. I've been telling people you don't belong here. I want you to know that I've reassessed that position. Because I made a compelling argument. Because you're right. And Slytherins respect people who are right, even when being right is inconvenient. Especially then. He walked away. Hermione watched him go. Then she stood for a moment in the corridor, alone, with the castle around her and the particular weight of what had just happened settling into place. She had not won Draco Malfoy's respect by arguing for blood equality. She had not won it by being Muggle-born and proving that Muggle-borns could be excellent. That argument was exhausting and required constant renewal and placed the burden of proof on the person who should not have to prove anything. She had won it by demonstrating, in the specific idiom of Slytherin, that she was a person worth accounting for, by being right, precisely at the moment when being right mattered. She did not like this. She noted, carefully, that she did not like the requirement of earning respect from people whose respect she should not have needed to earn. She noted that the system was wrong. She noted all of this in the private notebook with the cipher. Then, she walked to Transfiguration and was, as always, the first to achieve the correct result and the last to make a production of it. The Halloween troll changed things. Not in the way it changed things for Harry and Ron, who went to find her because she was crying in the bathroom, and who fought a mountain troll for her, because that was what Gryffindors did, charging into danger with the magnificent, terrifying recklessness that she had simultaneously admired and feared. It changed things because of what happened after. The professors arrived. McGonagall, sharp-lipped and furious. Snape, black-eyed and calculating. Quirrell, trembling. Harry and Ron faced McGonagall and took responsibility and earned the particular Gryffindor reward of simultaneous punishment and respect. Hermione watched. Then Hermione said, "It was my fault, Professor." McGonagall turned to her. "I beg your pardon? It was my fault the troll was in the bathroom. I'd read about them, in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And I told Parvati it wouldn't come to the upper floors because they typically stay in lower levels." Parvati told Lavender. Lavender apparently repeated it. The confidence may have caused someone to leave the troll unmonitored longer than they would have otherwise. That's speculative, but the causal connection is possible. McGonagall stared at her. "Are you attempting to take responsibility for a chain of events that resulted from a school security failure, Miss Granger?" "I'm identifying all contributing factors, Professor. That's how problems get fixed." "That is?" McGonagall stopped. Started again. 5 points to Slytherin. For intellectual honesty in a stressful situation. Hermione nodded. She glanced at Harry. Harry was staring at her. She gave him a very small look. The look that said, "This conversation later." The conversation happened in the library. The next morning, Harry and Ron on one side of the table, Hermione on the other, with the specific intensity of people who need to talk, but who are in a room designed for silence. "You didn't have to do that," Harry said. "I know. I could have kept quiet and let you and Ron absorb the punishment entirely. Yes, I calculated that option. And you came for me. You ran toward a mountain troll for me. In what moral framework does letting you take complete responsibility for that serve any legitimate purpose? It would have kept you out of trouble with Slytherin. If they knew you were, if Slytherin thinks I'm the kind of person who lets others take responsibility for shared events, they'll also think I'm the kind of person who could be manipulated into letting others take responsibility for unshared events. That's a worse position. I covered myself while acknowledging your role. That's not just gratitude, Harry. That's positioning." Ron blinked. "Did you just call getting us out of trouble positioning?" "I called it gratitude and positioning. Both things can be true. You're frightening. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it." Harry was looking at her with the expression she was coming to recognize, the one that said he was thinking about something beyond the immediate conversation, something in the middle distance where the future lived. "You're going to be different in Slytherin," Harry said, "than you would have been in Gryffindor." "I'm already different. I mean different from what we expected. What I expected. What did you expect? Hermione Granger as my friend who'd tell me the rules, who'd pull me back from stupid things. I'll still do that. But you'll also move pieces," Hermione said. "Yes, that's a Slytherin thing. See the board. Move pieces. I'll still pull you back from stupid things, but I'll also position us better before the stupid things become necessary." "Can you do both?" "I intend to find out." Snape taught potions as though the dungeon were his natural habitat, which it was, and as though the students were a necessary inconvenience, which most of them were. He began his first class with a speech that was, by all accounts, legendary, the ensnaring the senses speech, the bottling fame speech, the speech designed to establish immediate dominance through the combination of beautiful language and personal menace. Hermione had read about Snape, had read the school's history, had spoken to students on the train, had assembled what information was available about the potions professor of Hogwarts. She had prepared herself for a difficult teacher. She had not prepared herself for this. Snape looked at his students the way she looked at problems, with a comprehensive, rapid, unsparing assessment that categorized and filed and dismissed in the same motion. She watched his eyes move across the room and watched him arrive at conclusions about each student in the time it took to glance at them. Weasley, limited. Longbottom, terrified. Potter, famous. Malfoy, known quantity. Zabini, independent. His eyes reached her. Stopped. She watched him recalibrate. In a house full of people who had been managing impressions since birth, Hermione had developed an ability to read the management. She could see when someone was deciding which face to show. Snape's face showed nothing. It was the most controlled face she had encountered in her 11 years of reading people. But the recalibration itself was visible. The fractional hesitation. The adjustment. "Miss Granger," Snape said. His voice was the same as it was for everyone. Low, precise, designed to make you pay attention. "Tell me the difference between Wolfsbane Potion and Aconitum Compound." She had read this. In a text 3 grade levels above the standard curriculum. Wolfsbane Potion uses processed aconite reduced to a specific concentration that neutralizes rather than amplifies the poisonous alkaloids. Aconitum Compound uses the raw plant and is lethal in doses above 0.5 gram. The processing method is the distinction. Both start from the same plant. The intention of the brewer determines the outcome. A pause. The intention of the brewer Snape repeated. "The same ingredients can produce protection or death. The difference is knowledge and choice. I thought that was your point." Another pause. Longer, the class was very quiet. 5 points to Slytherin, Snape said, for listening to the subtext. He turned away. Hermione folded her hands on the desk and did not permit herself to smile, because smiling would have made an enemy of everyone in the room. She made a note instead. In the margin of her potions textbook, in her small, precise handwriting, Snape tests for second-order thinking. Respond to the question behind the question. It was the most useful note she took that year. By December, Hermione had established a position in Slytherin that was genuinely unprecedented. She was not popular. Popularity in Slytherin was a complicated currency, dependent on family name and blood status, and the accumulated social capital of generations. These were not things she possessed or could acquire. But she was respected in the way that Slytherin respected things. Not warmly, not demonstrably, but structurally. She had been incorporated into the house's assessment of itself. She was part of the calculations. She existed in the social arithmetic of the dungeons as a factor to be accounted for. She had helped Nott with his transfiguration essay. Not conspicuously, she had simply been in the library and had noticed an error in his sourcing and had mentioned it. Nott was quiet, private, carrying something heavy that she did not yet have enough information to identify. He had accepted the correction with the dignified silence of someone who does not like needing help, and who accepts it anyway, because the alternative is pride, and pride has costs. She had beaten Malfoy in every class, without making a point of it. This was the strategic move, excellence performed without display, results that spoke without commentary. Malfoy could not attack her for being better than him without admitting that she was better than him, and Malfoy was not yet ready to do that. She had answered every one of Snape's questions when called upon, had not volunteered the answers when not called upon, because she had noticed that volunteering in Snape's class was treated as interruption, while being asked was treated as competence, and the distinction mattered. And she had continued to have breakfast with Harry and Ron 3 times a week. This was the thing that the house watched most closely, that generated the most comment, the most speculation. "You're spending a lot of time with the Gryffindors," Pansy Parkinson said in the common room, in the kind of tone that managed to be both casual and pointed. "I'm spending time with my friends. Slytherins have Slytherin friends. Slytherins have useful friends. I have 2 friends who are loyal, capable, and positioned in the dominant house. That's not a social liability, Pansy. That's intelligence. Or it's sentiment dressed up as strategy. Both things can be true. But sentiment that serves a strategic purpose is particularly valuable because you protect it more fiercely than pure strategy. You're less likely to sacrifice a friend than an asset." Pansy looked at her. "You're going to be very difficult to dislike," she said. "That's the goal." She discovered the connection between Harry's scar and Quirrell on the 23rd of November. Not through drama. Not through a dramatic confrontation or a stumbled-upon conversation or any of the narrative mechanisms that stories typically deployed when they wanted to reveal a secret. She discovered it through data. She had been collecting data on Professor Quirrell since the 2nd week of term. Not because she suspected him, initially, but because Hermione collected data on everything. It was a habit. The world was full of patterns, and patterns were information. And information was the only reliable tool for navigating a world that had not been designed with her in mind. The data on Quirrell was interesting. His fear responses were inconsistent. He stuttered around students, but not around Snape, which inverted the expected power dynamic. His knowledge of dark arts was clearly deep, but carefully obscured, the marks of someone who knew they were being watched and who was managing the presentation of their expertise. His interest in the 3rd floor corridor was documented. His presence at the Quidditch match, the moment Harry's broom had jerked and Hermione had seen the eye contact and she had looked in the wrong direction first, at Snape, before correcting, was significant. The garlic was not a fear response. She had looked this up. Garlic against vampires was folklore, not fact. But garlic had another property. It was intensely aromatic and could overwhelm other scents. The turban smelled strongly of garlic. The smell might be concealing a different smell. She brought this to Snape. This was a risk, a significant one. She was a first year, bringing a theory with partial evidence to the most intimidating member of the staff, in his own territory, with no status to protect her if he dismissed her. She brought it anyway. Because the alternative was not bringing it, and not bringing it meant the information was wasted, and wasted information was, to Hermione Granger, a moral failure. Snape's office was cold. He was at his desk. The expression on his face when she knocked and entered was the expression she had catalogued as his default response to student interruptions, a precise combination of impatience and the sustained low-level contempt of a man who has been disappointed by his profession for 16 years. Miss Granger. It is 5 minutes past curfew. I have information about Professor Quirrell that I believe is relevant to something involving the third floor. The expression did not change. His hands, she noticed, went very still. Close the door, Snape said. She told him. Everything, the data, the patterns, the inconsistencies, the turban, the broom incident, the behaviour analysis. Snape listened without interruption, which was itself data. Snape interrupted everyone. It was a pedagogical habit as much as a personality trait. But he was listening to her the way he listened to things that mattered. When she finished, there was a silence. You are certain, Snape said. I'm presenting a hypothesis supported by evidence. The confidence level is approximately 70%. It increases to 90 plus if the smell beneath the garlic is what I think it is. Which is? Something that is not alive in the ordinary sense. The smell of magic that shouldn't be present. I've read about it. In a restricted text I borrowed from the library using a permission slip from. She paused. That's probably not important right now. Probably not. Snape looked at her. The black eyes, flat and penetrating, and underneath them something she was not sure she was reading correctly. You came to me, he said. You're my head of house, and you're the person in this school best positioned to evaluate and act on this information. Not Dumbledore? Dumbledore is the most powerful wizard in Britain and the obvious authority, which means if Quirrell is working for the Dark Lord, Dumbledore is the first person whose movements Quirrell will monitor. You're not. You're the potions professor. You're expected to be unpleasant and interested only in your own subject. That's a significant tactical advantage. Snape looked at her for a long moment. You are 11 years old, Snape said. Yes, you are the most strategically sophisticated 11-year-old I have ever encountered. I read a lot. That is not. He stopped. Something that was not quite a smile and was not quite a wince moved across his face. Your reading material is clearly broader than the curriculum. Considerably, go back to the dormitory, Miss Granger. Use the passage through the second floor to avoid Filch. I know the passage. Of course you do. Go. She went. Snape sat in his office for a long time, looking at the wall where the candle threw shadows. The child was right. He had known about Quirrell for weeks. But the specificity of her evidence, the rigour of her methodology, the precision of her strategic reasoning, these were not the tools of a first-year student. These were the tools of a spy. He filed this information in the place where he kept information about people who might become important. It was a small file. It was now larger. The Philosopher's Stone. She solved it in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. This was not the fastest it had ever been solved. Dumbledore's protective enchantments had been designed for a specific level of challenge, but it was the fastest it had been solved by anyone under 40. He was not supposed to be there. The trapdoor was for Harry and Ron, who had gone together in the Gryffindor way, running toward the problem, improvising solutions as they arrived, the particular magnificent recklessness of people who trust themselves to figure it out. Hermione had followed because she had already figured it out, and could not, in good conscience, let them proceed without the solution. "The devil's snare relaxes if you stop struggling," she said when they fell through the trapdoor. They stopped struggling. They descended. The chess game was Ron's, pure Ron, an act of tactical genius and physical courage that made Hermione's chest ache, because Ron Weasley was always being underestimated by people who could not see past the chess and the freckles to the mind underneath. He sacrificed himself. The White Queen took him. He fell, and Hermione's hands gripped the sides of her square, and she made herself breathe. "He'll be all right," Harry said. "I know. Go, I'll stay with him. I should stay with Ron until he regains consciousness, and then both of us should go for help. You should go forward. That was always the design. We're here to get you to the stone. Go get it." Harry looked at her. The green eyes. The scar. "Come back," Hermione said. "I intend to." He went. She knelt beside Ron, checked his pulse, his breathing, the specific indicators that she had read about in basic healing charms, because she had anticipated the possibility of injury and had prepared. He was unconscious, but stable. She cast the 4 spells she had memorized. Waited. The waiting was its own experience. She had been waiting in one form or another since first year, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the information to be complete, waiting for the board to align. She had gotten quite good at it. The patience was real, not performed. But the particular waiting in the chamber was different. This was waiting without the option of preparation. She had done everything she could prepare. The preparation was complete. All that remained was the outcome, which was Harry's to determine. She had spent a great deal of her life being the person who determined outcomes. This, trusting Harry to determine one without her, was harder than she expected. She occupied herself, reviewed everything she knew about basilisk venom and phoenix tears and the magical interaction between the two, assessed the structural integrity of the tunnel above her, thought through the next 6 steps if Harry succeeded, and the next 6 steps if Harry did not succeed, because contingency planning was how she managed the waiting, because doing was always preferable to not doing, even when the doing was only in her head. And while she waited, she picked up the rook, the sacrificed piece, turned it over in her hands. In chess, you sacrificed pieces to win the game. In life, the real life that was forming around her, the life of a world at war, of a Dark Lord returning, of a boy with a lightning scar who ran toward impossible things, sacrifice was the mechanism. The thing that won battles. The tool of last resort. Ron Weasley had sacrificed himself for his friend without a second's hesitation, at the age of 11, in a game that was real. Hermione held the rook and thought about what she would sacrifice when the time came, what she was capable of giving, what she was not. She did not have an answer yet. She tucked that question behind the occlumency shields she had not yet been taught and filed it under. Things to know before they become necessary. Second year came with the Chamber of Secrets, and the Chamber of Secrets came with Hermione's first real test. Not the academic test, not the research. She identified the monster, the basilisk, in the library from a text on dark creatures combined with a close analysis of the petrification patterns 3 days before anyone else had even begun to narrow the possibilities. She folded the page and put it in her robes and went directly to Harry. "Basilisk," she said. "What?" The monster in the chamber. It's a basilisk. The kills by direct gaze make sense. A basilisk's gaze is fatal. The petrifications make sense. They're seeing the gaze indirectly, through reflections or through other surfaces. It moves through the pipes. It's a serpent, which means it responds to parcel tongue. Harry stared at her. You figured that out this morning. In the library. 3 days of research compressed into 4 hours because I had the right framework. Hermione, I know. Save it. The question is what we do. They planned. In the library, in the gaps between classes, with the urgency of people who knew that the list of petrified students was growing and that the school was 3 petrifications from being closed. But it was not the research that tested her. It was the polyjuice potion. Slytherin students have access to Malfoy, Ron said, in Harry's dormitory, in the hushed intensity of a planning session. You could find out from him whether he knows anything about the chamber. Hermione looked at the ingredients list. Boomslang skin. Fluxweed. A hair from the intended target. The polyjuice potion brews in a month, she said. I know the formula. I can make. Can you get the ingredients? The boomslang skin and bicorn horn are in Snape's private stores. You can't steal from Snape's stores. I can. I won't enjoy it. But I can. She stole them. On a Tuesday afternoon, with a confundus charm that she had taught herself from a 7th year text and that she cast on Snape's wards with the specific, surgical focus of someone who understands exactly what they are breaking and exactly how to break it cleanly. She was not proud of this. She noted it, categorized it under things I did that were wrong and necessary, and moved forward. But in Myrtle's bathroom, transforming into the cat, the wrong hair, the wrong target, the cosmically appropriate humiliation, Hermione lay on the floor of a bathroom stall and laughed. Not at the joke. At herself. At the meticulous, methodical, comprehensive plan that had collapsed into fur and whiskers because she had grabbed a hair from Millicent Bulstrode's robes without confirming the source. She had forgotten to account for the cat. This was, she decided, the most important lesson of 2nd year, that no plan is total. That intelligence without humility is just arrogance with better vocabulary. That you can be the most prepared person in the room and still be lying on a bathroom floor with a tail because you forgot to check the evidence. She spent 3 weeks in the hospital wing, which she used to read 6 books and redesign the plan. She came out with the basilisk hypothesis confirmed and the name Tom Riddle identified as the architect of the chamber's original opening, which meant Harry was going down. I'll be useless in the chamber, she said in the hospital wing to Harry. My eyes. Basilisk gaze is lethal. Even recovered, I'm a liability. So you stay. I will not stay. I will position myself here at the entrance to the pipe system with a mirror and 3 backup plans and a signal charm for the moment you emerge. You go in. I support from the edge. That's the strategic play. You've planned this from the hospital bed. I've planned this from the hospital bed. Yes, did you expect otherwise? No, it still makes me a little frightened. Good. Fear is appropriate preparation for basilisks. 3rd year. Sirius Black. The Time Turner. The Time Turner was given to her by McGonagall at the start of the year for the purposes of attending multiple classes simultaneously. McGonagall trusted her with it because McGonagall had assessed her correctly, because McGonagall understood that the Hermione Granger who sat in Slytherin and beat every student in every class was not a threat to the school, but a resource for it. She used the Time Turner exclusively for its stated purpose for 9 months. And then, in the hospital wing, when Dumbledore left the room with the particular meaningful emptiness of a man who was telling them something without saying it, she turned to Harry and said, 3 hours. What? We have 3 hours. Back, Hermione, Sirius is innocent. I know it. You know it. Dumbledore knows it, and he just walked out of this room with the specific expression of someone who has a plan that requires someone else to execute it, because he has positioned himself outside the bounds of its execution. That's accurate. He can't do it himself. We can. We have the time turner. We have 3 hours. Are we going or not? They went. She had planned it in 30 seconds because she had been running the scenarios since the moment Pettigrew disappeared, and she had understood, with the bone-deep certainty that came from complete information, what the time turner was actually for. Buckbeak, Sirius, the hippogriff, flying into the moonlight with a free man on its back. She stood in the forest and watched them go, and felt the particular Slytherin satisfaction of a plan executed correctly, the quiet, private, almost intellectual pleasure of seeing variables resolve into the predicted outcome. You knew, Harry said. Before we went back. You knew exactly what we were going to do. I knew the parameters. The details improvised themselves. Is that frightening to you, being that far ahead? Hermione thought about this honestly. Sometimes it's lonely, being the person who sees the move before the move. You have to wait for everyone else to catch up, and the waiting is hard, isolating, but necessary. If I moved before others were ready, the pieces wouldn't be in position. Is that how you think of us? Pieces? I think of you as people I love, who are also positioned in ways that serve specific functions. The two things coexist. You're not less real to me because you're also important strategically. Harry looked at her. That's the most Slytherin thing you've ever said to me. Wait until 4th year. 4th year was the Triwizard Tournament and the moment Hermione Granger changed the war. Not in the way that stories change wars. Not with a spell or a battle or the dramatic singular act of courage that gets put on plaques. She changed it in a library. Over 4 months. Alone, mostly, because the research was too specific and too dangerous to share widely, and because the conclusions it produced were not conclusions that most people were ready to receive. She researched Horcruxes. Not because she was assigned to. Not because anyone asked her to. Because Harry's scar connected to Voldemort in a way that the standard literature did not fully explain. Because the Dark Lord's survival after the Killing Curse required a mechanism that canonical magical theory did not account for. Because Hermione Granger's response to unexplained phenomena was always and automatically to identify the explanation. She found the answer in a restricted text that she accessed through, means she preferred not to document. She read the chapter on soul magic, on the splitting of the soul, on the creation of magical anchors. She sat in the library at 2 a.m. with the text open in front of her and felt the specific terrible sensation of understanding something that changes everything. Then she closed the book, memorized the relevant sections, returned it to the shelf, went back to the dormitory, and began to calculate. If Voldemort had made Horcruxes, which the evidence strongly suggested, then the war could not be won by simply defeating him. Every destroyed body would be followed by a return. Every apparent death was temporary. The real work was not the battle, but the demolition that had to precede it. She needed to know how many, where they were, what they were. This was a years-long research project. She began it in October of 4th year. She did not tell Harry. Not yet. Not until she had more than a hypothesis. Because Harry, who was good and brave and entirely capable of running into a situation armed with a half-formed theory, needed her to have the full theory before she gave it to him. The full theory took 2 years. During those 2 years, she attended classes, maintained her position in the house, supported Harry through the tournament and the graveyard and Cedric's death and the Ministry's denial and umbrage, and researched Horcruxes in every available hour. She had 4 identified by the time she went to Dumbledore, in the summer before 6th year. Dumbledore listened. He did not look surprised. He looked instead like a man who has been carrying a weight alone and has just been offered someone to share it with. "You know," Hermione said, "I have been developing the same theory. Your research is..." He paused. "Your research is more complete than mine. I had access to sources you may not have used. I suspect you had access to several sources I would prefer you had not used. Yes, is that a problem?" Under ordinary circumstances, yes, under current circumstances, Dumbledore looked at her across his desk. "Miss Granger, I have been wondering for several years exactly who you are and what you are capable of. I believe I now have a partial answer to both questions." "Partial?" "You continue to exceed my projections. I have learned to treat you as a source of revisions rather than confirmations." He folded his hands. "Tell me your count." 4 confirmed. 2 suspected. 1. She stopped. 1 that I don't have enough evidence to state yet, but that I have a hypothesis about that involves Harry directly. The office was very quiet. "The scar," Dumbledore said. "Yes. What do you believe?" "I believe it contains a fragment of Voldemort's soul. I believe it was created accidentally the night he survived the killing curse at Godric's Hollow. And I believe that destroying it requires..." She stopped again. "That's where my research is incomplete. Mine is not." Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. "The killing curse, directed at Harry while the sacrificial protection is active, will destroy the fragment without destroying Harry. The protection acts as a shield for Harry's soul while allowing the fragment to be separated." Hermione processed this. "Harry has to be hit with the killing curse. He has to appear to die. He will not." "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be about anything involving sacrificial magic, which is an imprecise science." Hermione was quiet for a very long time. The instruments on Dumbledore's desk whirred. Fawkes sang a single, clear note. "Don't tell him yet," Hermione said. "Not until we know more. Not until he has everything he needs to face it." "I agree. And don't tell him in a way that removes his choice. When it comes to it, when the moment comes, he has to choose to walk into that forest. Fully informed, fully consenting. If you take the choice from him, you take the thing that makes the sacrifice meaningful." Dumbledore looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not the benevolent headmaster expression, or the twinkle, or the particular compassion plus calculation expression he deployed in difficult conversations. It was something simpler. Respect, genuine, unperformed respect for another person's mind. "I have made that mistake before," Dumbledore said, quietly, "the mistake of managing people rather than trusting them." "I know. I read about Ariana." He was silent. "I'm sorry," Hermione said. "That was accurate," Dumbledore said, "as you usually are. 6th year. Snape's double role fully understood. Dumbledore's death. Harry, Ron, and Hermione on the run. The year in the tent." Hermione had prepared for this too. Not because she had known exactly what form it would take. She had not anticipated the Horcrux hunt as a literal camping expedition through rural Britain for months on end, but because she had prepared for the principle of it. She had packed the beaded bag with the undetectable extension charm before the school year ended. She had stocked it with everything she could identify as potentially useful, including several things that seemed excessive at the time and that proved indispensable. Ron left. This was the hardest part. Not because she did not understand why. The locket was working on him, amplifying everything dark and doubtful in a mind that was already struggling, pulling at the threads of inadequacy that Ron Weasley had always been most vulnerable to. She understood it. She had seen it coming, had watched the locket's effect accumulating over weeks, had known that at some point it would be too much. Understanding did not make the empty tent less empty. Harry fell into the flat, effectless grief of someone running on insufficient resources. Hermione cooked, maintained the wards, researched, planned, and every night, before she slept, she allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of missing Ron, missing the easy warmth of him, the way he ate and laughed, the specific comfort of his presence, which she had not known she relied on until it was absent. 10 minutes. Then she closed the notebook and slept and started again. Ron came back, with the sword of Gryffindor, standing in the tent entrance with cold in his face and contrition in his eyes and the specific posture of a person who has made a mistake they cannot unmake and who is prepared to spend the rest of their life making up for it. Hermione did not hug him immediately. She looked at him for a long moment, the measured look, the Slytherin look, the look that was assessing and analysing and filing the information. Then she hugged him, fiercely, with the accumulated force of 4 months of suppressed relief. "Don't do that again," she said, into his shoulder. "I won't," he said. "I promise. I'm going to hold you to it. I know." She let go, stepped back, wiped her face with a clinical efficiency that was absolutely Hermione. "Now," she said, "I need to tell you both something about the Horcruxes. The Battle of Hogwarts." Hermione fought. Of course she fought. She had spent 7 years preparing, had 7 years of accumulated knowledge and Slytherin discipline and Gryffindor instinct. And the combination was, Ron had said it first and said it most accurately, terrifying. She moved through the battle the way she moved through everything, with a plan that adapted in real time to incoming information. She had identified the positions, the choke points, the vulnerabilities of the castle's defensive structure, and the Death Eater assault pattern. She had communicated this to Kingsley Shacklebolt and Arthur Weasley in the 20 minutes before the fighting started, talking fast, precise, complete. They had listened. They had moved people accordingly. She did not think about this as her contribution. She thought about it as a function. The plan was just the preparation. The fighting was what followed. She fought beside Harry and Ron the way she had always been beside them. Not behind them. Beside, the specific, precise meaning of that word, beside, not behind, not in front, but alongside, was the thing she had been building for 7 years. The relationship that her sorting had complicated, and that had survived the complication by being more real than the complication. The cup. A basilisk fang from the chamber, still there, which she had known about. She had told Ron. Ron had retrieved it. They had destroyed the cup together, in the chamber, with the sound of water and the memory of the basilisk's corpse and Harry's voice in the tunnel above. "Go," Hermione said. "After. He needs you." "You, I'm right behind you." "Go." Ron went. She stood in the chamber for a moment, looked at the statue of Slytherin, at the face she had read about since the beginning, the face of the house that had formed her, the face of the ideology she had spent 7 years dismantling from the inside. "I know," she said, to the statue, to the stone, to the idea that had claimed her. "I know what I cost you." "Good?" She climbed back up. Harry walked into the forest. She knew he would, had known for 2 years since Dumbledore told her. She stood at the edge of the forbidden forest with Ron, and they watched, and she kept her face composed, because composure was the gift she could give Harry in this moment, the visible certainty that someone who knows how this ends is not afraid. He went in. She breathed. He came back. She breathed differently. The final confrontation. The Great Hall. The Brother Wands. The Elder Wand refusing to kill its master. Voldemort fell. The silence. Hermione stood in the Great Hall and watched the living find each other and the dead be found, and the particular weight of the morning, the specific gravity of a war that has just ended, settled over everything. Ron took her hand. She looked at him. "We won. Ron said. We survived, Hermione corrected. Winning comes after, when we build what was worth fighting for. Can't I just have 5 minutes of we won? She squeezed his hand. 5 minutes, starting now. He grinned. It was the most purely Ron thing she had ever seen, the uncomplicated, undefended joy of a boy who wanted 5 minutes of victory before the work began. She gave him the 5 minutes. Then, the work began. Years after. The Ministry. Hermione Granger, Minister for Magic, age 41. Not the youngest minister, the youngest effective one. There was a distinction, and Hermione had insisted on it in her acceptance speech, in the precise, slightly relentless way that she insisted on accuracy in all things. Her office was organised. Every document had a place. Every decision had a paper trail. Every policy change had a research foundation, a consultation record, and a projected outcome analysis. Her staff had initially found this exhausting, and had eventually found it clarifying, the way people find hard things clarifying when they survive them. The reforms were real. Slowly real. The kind of real that did not happen in gestures or speeches, but in the grinding, inglorious work of institutional change, revising regulations, restructuring departments, dismantling the systems that had allowed blood purity ideology to shape policy for generations. She had started with the Hogwarts curriculum, Muggle studies, rewritten from the ground up, mandatory for all houses. Blood status removed from all official documentation. The sorting system reviewed, not abolished. She had thought about this carefully and concluded that the houses had value as communities, as starting points, but that the rigid social separation between them was the problem, not the sorting itself. Cross-house common areas, joint classes, a deliberate, sustained policy of making the divide permeable. Harry was head aura. He visited on Tuesdays. They ate lunch and talked about cases and the politics of Wizengamot appointments and the slow, perpetual project of a world healing from a war. You're going to run out of things to fix, Harry said, one Tuesday. The world is infinite. I'm not going to run out. You've been going at this pace since before the war ended. The war created the urgency. The urgency created the pace. The pace became the method. You know you're allowed to rest. I rest. On Thursday evenings. I have a schedule. You have a scheduled rest. Scheduling rest ensures it actually happens. Unscheduled rest is aspirational. I don't work with aspirational. Ron appeared in the doorway. He was carrying takeaway containers and wearing the expression of a man who has been doing this for 15 years and who has not yet decided whether to find it endearing or concerning. He has a scheduled rest, Harry told Ron. I know. Thursday evenings. I have the calendar notification. You both have the calendar notification? So do your children, Ron said. I thought about getting it put on the office building's emergency alert system, but I wasn't sure that was appropriate. Hermione looked at them, at the two men who were, in every configuration of the world, her people. The Gryffindors she had walked beside since she was 11, through the troll and the chess game and the Horcruxes and the war and everything after. Sit down, she said, both of you. They sat. She cleared space on her desk. Ron distributed the takeaway with the easy efficiency of a man who had been feeding people in difficult circumstances since he was 11. I've been thinking, Hermione said, about how different everything would be if I'd been sorted into Gryffindor. Ron and Harry looked at each other. Different how? Harry asked. I would have been simpler. Braver in the obvious ways. Less patient. Less, she paused. I would have been loud about the right things, and loud is useful, but it isn't always effective. In Slytherin I learned to be quiet about the right things, to position before I spoke, to choose the moment. And? Ron prompted, and I believe it made the difference, not my intelligence that was there regardless of house. The house shaped how I deployed it. Gryffindor would have taught me to use my intelligence as a shield. Slytherin taught me to use it as a scalpel. The war would have been won either way. Harry was going to win the war regardless. But the research, the Horcrux count, the conversation with Dumbledore about the scar, the plan for the forest. She was quiet for a moment. Those things needed the patience to wait, to not act until the information was complete. I'm not sure I had that patience naturally. I think the house built it. You had it naturally, Harry said. You were always the one who said wait, think, check the facts. I said it. But in Gryffindor, who was going to listen? You'd have run toward the problem, and I'd have run with you, slightly more prepared. In Slytherin, I learned to make waiting feel like action, to make preparation feel like progress. That's a different skill. Ron was looking at her with the expression that was his most private one, the one she had learned to read as the face he made when he loved her most completely, not because of her brilliance, but because of the specific, irreplaceable person the brilliance was attached to. We got lucky, he said, that the hat put you there. I chose it, Hermione said. The hat gave me the choice. Then we got lucky that you chose it. No, you got lucky that I chose right. That's a different thing. Is there a difference? Hermione considered this, considered the years, the common room, the drought under the door, the warming charm she had cast on her first night, Daphne across the room turning a page, Malfoy in the corridor saying I've reassessed, Snape's office, the candles, the black eyes recalibrating, the library, the research, the 10-minute morning sessions she had allowed herself in the tent. The difference, Hermione said, is agency. Luck is what happens to you. Choice is what you do with it. She picked up her fork. Harry picked up his. Ron had already been eating for 45 seconds because Ron never waited. Besides, Hermione said, Slytherin got the best deal. They've been dining out on having me as an alumna for 20 years. The common room has a portrait of you, Ron said. I know. I find it flattering and deeply unnecessary. It's right next to Salazar Slytherin. I know. I find that, she stopped, allowed herself the smile, the real one. The undefended, unstrategic, purely Hermione smile that she deployed rarely, and that meant everything. Actually, she said, I find that fitting. There are spaces between the milestones, places where the texture lives, the conversations nobody recorded. Let us go back. The first time Hermione made a mistake in Slytherin, she made sure nobody saw it. This was important. In Gryffindor, she had friends in Gryffindor, she knew how Gryffindor operated, mistakes were absorbed by the collective. You failed, your friends saw you fail, and the failure was shared and processed and transformed into the bonding material of a close friendship. Gryffindors wore their failures the way they wore their courage, visibly, without shame, as evidence of effort. In Slytherin, failure was private. Not because Slytherins didn't fail, they failed as often as anyone, sometimes more, because the ambitions that drove them exceeded the resources that supported them, but because the failure was weaponizable. Information about weakness was currency, and currency in the wrong hands bought the wrong things. She had understood this intellectually since before the sorting. Living it was different. The mistake was in second-year potions. She misread the measurement for lionfish spines by a factor of 2, added too much, and the potion destabilized. She caught it before it exploded, barely, and in the 3 seconds between realizing the error and stabilizing the reaction, she felt something she had not felt since primary school. Terror. Not of the potion. Of being seen making the error. Of someone noting it, filing it, of the knowledge that she had been maintaining a position of competence in this house for 14 months, and that a single witnessed failure would complicate everything she had built. The stabilization worked. The potion survived. Imperfect, but functional. She corrected the notes in her record to show the right measurements going forward and did not record the deviation. That night, in the dormitory, she sat on her bed and examined the feeling. The terror. The instinct to hide the mistake. She turned it over and looked at its undersides and identified, with the clinical precision she brought to everything including herself, what it was. It was not strategic. It was shame. Pure, unvarnished, 11 years of being the odd one out shame. The shame of someone who has staked their worth on being right and who cannot bear to be seen being wrong. She wrote about it in her private journal, the one she kept in a cipher that would have taken most adults several weeks to decode. She wrote, "The need to appear infallible is a weakness. I will work on this. Start small. Allow one visible imperfection per week. Build tolerance for the experience of being seen making mistakes. Because the alternative is worse. A person who cannot admit error cannot correct it." She started the following Tuesday. She got a question wrong in Transfiguration. Deliberately, then corrected herself without being prompted, with a small, clear acknowledgement. I misstated that. The correct answer is... Professor McGonagall paused, looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, but was close. 5 points to Slytherin, McGonagall said, for intellectual honesty. Hermione noted this. Visible correction of error earns more respect than invisible error avoidance. The lesson applies beyond the classroom. She was 12 years old. The relationship between Hermione and Daphne Greengrass evolved slowly, the way all relationships that matter evolve, through accumulated evidence rather than dramatic moments. The evidence was small, consistent, a book left on Hermione's desk when she was running late for class, a note in the margin of Hermione's charms essay, not corrections, observations, the kind of annotations that a reader makes when they are genuinely thinking about the text. A word, once, in the corridor, when a 7th year Slytherin said something about Hermione's parentage and Daphne said, in a tone so cold it functioned as a temperature, if you find the company unacceptable, leave it. The 7th year left it. Hermione looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at her notebook. Thank you, Hermione said. I dislike rudeness, Daphne said. Is that the only reason? No, but it's the reason I'm willing to state in a corridor. By the end of 2nd year, they studied together twice a week. Not the easy, chaotic studying of friends who distract each other with jokes and tangents. The precise, parallel studying of two people who preferred to work alone, but who had discovered that the other's presence improved the quality of the silence. Daphne was the smartest person in Slytherin, who nobody noticed. Because Daphne did not perform intelligence, did not volunteer answers, did not ace tests visibly, did not do any of the things that intelligence is supposed to do when it wants to be recognized. Daphne accumulated. She read. She filed. She spoke rarely, and when she spoke, was always right. Hermione thought about this, about the gap between being intelligent and being recognized as intelligent. She had spent her life on the wrong side of that gap, the side where recognition was more present than it was comfortable, where the hand that went up too often and the marks that came back too high were problems rather than achievements. Daphne had solved the gap from the other direction, by making the recognition invisible. There was something to learn in that. She filed it. Why don't you let people see what you can do? Hermione asked in the library 3rd year. Why would I? Because you're extraordinary. Because you're wasted in a house that undervalues you. I'm not wasted. I'm positioned. For what? Daphne looked up from her book, grey eyes. Not the calculating grey of Draco's eyes, but something quieter. Patient. The grey of someone who has decided that the long game is the only game worth playing. For after, Daphne said. After what? After Hogwarts. after the war that is clearly coming, based on any coherent reading of the political situation. After all of this, she gestured at the library, the castle, the world it contained, stabilizes into whatever it becomes. I want to be positioned when the board resets. What position do you want? One that allows me to be useful without being visible. I have no interest in being Minister for Magic. I might, Hermione said. I know. That's why I'm useful to you. Hermione looked at her. That's an extraordinary thing to say. It's an accurate thing to say. I'm useful to you. You're useful to me. We're different tools for different purposes, and we complement each other's gaps. That's not friendship. That's structure. Can it be both? Daphne turned a page. It already is, she said. I just prefer to acknowledge the structure before the feeling. Why? Because structure is stable. Feelings change. Both can change. Yes, but structure changes more slowly and is easier to repair. She paused. Also, you are the only person in this school who treats me like I'm interesting rather than decorative. That is a feeling. But it is also structure. Hermione smiled. The small, private smile. Fewer than 5 weeks, she said. Daphne looked at her blankly for a moment. Then, slowly, she also smiled. What are you talking about? She said. Nothing, never mind. The 5th year was the year that Umbridge came to Hogwarts and Hermione ran the resistance from inside the enemy's preferred house. This was deeply satisfying. Dolores Umbridge was a woman who had built her power on the conviction that certain kinds of people like Hermione Granger, were manageable, controllable, that the combination of institutional authority and blood status ideology could be deployed to keep Muggle-borns in their place, which was below purebloods, which was below people like Umbridge. Umbridge was wrong about this. She had been wrong about it in 1,000 smaller ways for her entire career. The specific final way in which she was wrong about it was Hermione Granger, sitting in a Slytherin common room, organising a secret defence group with the precision of a military planner and the social access of someone who knew where every piece was on the board. The "da" was Harry's. She made that clear, to herself and to everyone involved. Harry was the teacher. Harry was the centre. The courage and the training and the specific lived experience of surviving Voldemort were his to give. What Hermione provided was the structure, the intelligence network, the communication system, the enchanted coins, which she charmed with a variation on the Protean charm she had found in an advanced charms text and adapted over 3 weeks of careful work. The compartmentalization, the operational security, the mapping of Umbridge's movements and schedules, and the patterns in her inspection routines that could be exploited for gaps. He also provided intelligence from Slytherin. Not betraying housemates, she was specific about this boundary, specific with herself about where the line was. But information about Umbridge's plans that she gathered from the proximity of pure blood students whose parents had ministry connections, who talked freely in a common room they considered safe, who had not yet realised that the Muggle born in the corner was listening. This was the Slytherin part. The part that Gryffindor would never have taught her. The patience to sit in a room full of information and wait for the right piece. She never felt guilty about this. The information protected people. The listening protected people. The only question that mattered was, what does this serve? And the answer was life. And life was sufficient justification. One more story before the battle. The summer before 7th year. Before Dumbledore died. Before everything. Hermione went home, her parents' house. Suburban, the smell of it, her mother's perfume, her father's aftershave, the particular combination of warmth and order that was the baseline of everything she was. She sat in the kitchen and her mother made tea and her father read the paper, and the world was, briefly, the world as it had been before magic. "How is school?" her mother asked. "Excellent. I'm first in every subject." "That's wonderful, darling. Are you happy?" Hermione considered the question. Not the polite version of it, the real version. Was she happy? She was useful. She was effective. She was, by any measurable standard, achieving everything she had set out to achieve. She had built a position in a house that had not wanted her and had transformed it into something she was genuinely proud of. She had friends who were more important to her than she had words to say. She was part of something that mattered in a way that primary school had never offered her. Was she happy? "I think so," she said. "But it's a complicated kind of happy. Not the simple kind. Is there a simple kind? For some people. Ron is happy simply. It's one of his best qualities." Her mother smiled. "Is Ron someone important?" "Ron is one of the most important people in my life. He's also the person who reminds me every time I get too inside my own head that the point of all the thinking is the living." "That sounds like wisdom. That's Ron. He doesn't call it wisdom, he calls it common sense." "And Harry?" Hermione looked at the table. "Harry is..." She stopped. Tried again. "Harry is the axis. Everything orbits him, and he has no idea, and the not having any idea is part of what makes him Harry. He carries more than anyone should carry, and he carries it without complaint, and when it gets too heavy, he still moves." "You love them both," her mother said. "Yes, very much. In different ways." "And the house? Slytherin?" "The house taught me how to use what I have. Not to apologize for it, not to hide it, to deploy it precisely at the right moment for the right purpose." She looked at her mother. "I think I would have been a good Gryffindor, but I'm a better person for being a Slytherin." "Why?" "Because Slytherin taught me that being right isn't enough. You have to be right and you have to be effective. You have to know when to speak and when to wait, and who needs to hear what and how. Gryffindor teaches you to be brave. Slytherin teaches you to be strategic. The combination is you," her mother said. Hermione smiled. "Me?" Her father looked up from the paper. "Do you want biscuits?" "Yes, please." "See?" her father said to her mother. Biscuits. The great equalizer. Doesn't matter if you're in Slytherin or Gryffindor or whatever. Everyone wants biscuits. "Dad, I'm just saying. The houses all have biscuits. The biscuits don't care which house you're in." Hermione laughed. The real laugh. The one that came from somewhere uncomplicated. "That," she said, "is the wisest thing you've ever said." The diadem. Hermione found it in the room of requirement in 5th year, 3 years before the battle. She had gone into the room looking for a quiet space to think, as she often did, and the room had configured itself as the junk room, the enormous, labyrinthine storage space that contains 7 centuries of accumulated objects and that most students use to hide their homework. She was moving through the stacks when she felt it. The particular resonance of corrupted magic, cold and deliberate and dense. The magic of something that had been made with the specific purpose of fragmenting a soul. She had been researching Horcruxes for 3 months by then. She recognized it. She did not touch it. Did not disturb it. Walked out of the room, went to her dormitory, and made a note. Diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, located in the room of requirement, hidden in the collection. Horcrux. Do not remove or disturb until ready. The protection may be monitored. Then she closed the notebook and returned to studying. This was the Slytherin part. The part that required her to find a Horcrux and walk away from it. Because the time was not right, and acting on incomplete information was worse than waiting. She waited 2 years. When the time came, when the battle started, when she and Harry and Ron made their rapid, improvised return to the room, she knew exactly where it was. knew the path through the stacks, knew the wards and how to bypass them, and which way to approach so that the approach itself did not trigger the protections. They destroyed it with fiend fire. Hermione had considered the basilisk fang faster, cleaner, easier to contain, but the diadem's protective enchantments were layered in a way that she had calculated would absorb a stabbing force and redirect it. Cursed fire was the only reliable option. She contained it herself. 3 seconds of controlled burn, then extinguished. The diadem screamed. "How do you know where it is?" Ron asked, standing in the doorway of the room with ash on his robes. "I found it 2 years ago." Ron stared at her. "And you've been sitting on that for 2 years." "I've been waiting for the right moment. Hermione, the right moment is now. Let's go." The right moment had been now for exactly 8 minutes, since the moment she identified that the protection wards would be at their lowest resonance during the height of the battle, when the ambient magical interference was high enough to mask their approach. She had done the calculation in the corridor while people were shouting and spells were flying. This was the Slytherin part. The patience. The waiting. The recognition that the right information at the wrong moment was as useless as no information at all. She had spent 7 years practicing patience. The practice had paid off. After. The portrait went up in the Slytherin common room 3 years after the war. Hermione was 32. She was deputy minister by then, preparing the groundwork for the campaign that would make her minister 4 years later. She went to see it on a Saturday morning, when the common room was mostly empty, when the students who were there looked at her with the particular expression of teenagers confronting the weight of history, simultaneously reverent and slightly resentful of the reverence. The portrait was good. The painter had captured something. The expression wasn't the performing intelligence expression that official photographs usually showed. It was the expression she wore when she was thinking. Not thinking at anyone, just thinking. The private look. The internal look. She stood in front of it for a moment. "Minister Granger," said the portrait. "I'm deputy minister. I thought we'd skip a few steps." "I don't skip steps." "No," the portrait agreed. "You don't." It looked at her with an expression that was her own expression and was therefore, as always, impossible to fully read. Was it worth it? The house? You know it was. I know the outcomes. I'm asking if you'd make the same choice. She looked at the portrait. At the 14-year-old girl who had sat in the cold spot near the door on her first night, who had cast a warming charm and been assessed by a blonde girl across the room and had begun to build something out of the most unlikely materials available. "Yes," she said. "Knowing everything I know now, the loneliness, the difficulty, the years of fighting to be seen as legitimate in my own house, yes, the house was right. The hat was right. What would Gryffindor have given you? Everything I had anyway. The courage was always there. The loyalty was always there. The friendships." She paused. "Actually, I'm not sure I would have had those friendships in Gryffindor. The specific friendships. Harry and Ron would have been my friends regardless of house, because those people are those people. But the friendship would have been easier. Less tested. Less." She found the word. Load-bearing. Load-bearing. Friendships that survive the wrong house, the wrong war, the wrong year in a tent, the wrong everything. Those friendships are structural. They're not additional. They're the architecture. The portrait looked at her. She looked at the portrait. "You were right to choose this," the portrait said. "I know," Hermione said. "But thank you for saying it." She turned. Walked to the door that she had shivered through every morning for 7 years, that opened onto the corridor, the castle, the world. The draught was still there. It always was. The castle was ancient and the door was old and the gap at the bottom was structural. She cast the warming charm. Walked through. The corridor was warm. The war. the things the war demanded, the things Hermione gave it. Let us not look away from those. She obliviated her parents. In the summer before 7th year, when it was clear that the war was coming to its final form, when it was clear that being connected to Hermione Granger was going to become, very quickly, the most dangerous thing a person could be. She had prepared the house, packed her things, set the modification on her parents' memories. A new life, a new name, a new home in Australia where Wendell and Monica Wilkins ran a dental practice and had no daughter and had never heard of a school called Hogwarts or a girl called Hermione. She stood in the kitchen. The same kitchen where her mother had asked, "Are you happy?" and she had said, "I think so." But it's a complicated kind of happy. She stood in the kitchen and she looked at her parents, who did not yet know what was about to happen, who were eating dinner and talking about a television program, and who were real and present and hers. The charm was precise. It had to be precise. She had spent 2 months designing it, testing variants, refining the architecture until she was certain it was reversible, until she knew the exact sequence that would restore them. She was certain. She had tested it on herself first, which was the kind of thing that only Hermione would think to do, and that had produced 3 hours of the most disorienting experience of her life. She raised her wand. Her father looked up. Smiled. More biscuits? No thank you, Dad. She cast the charm. They forgot her. Immediately. Cleanly. The way a well-cast charm works. No hesitation, no residue, just the gentle reordering of memory into a different configuration. A configuration that contained Wendell and Monica Wilkins, but not their daughter. Not the girl with the bushy hair who had made them proud and worried and proud again their entire lives. Her mother said something to her father. He laughed. They didn't look at her. She stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds. One last moment. The smell of biscuits and her mother's perfume and her father's aftershave and everything that was and was not going to be safe. Then she walked out the front door, closed it behind her. Disapparated, she did not cry. She had prepared for not crying. She had understood, 2 months ago, that crying would be self-indulgence she could not afford. That the energy required for grief was energy that had another destination, that the obliviate was the kindest thing she could do for 2 people she loved, and that the kindness did not require her to feel nothing but did require her to function. She functioned. She found Harry. She started the hunt. But in the tent, on the first night when Ron was asleep, and Harry was asleep, and the trees were quiet, and the dark was very dark, she allowed herself 10 minutes. She set a timer on her watch. And for 10 minutes she sat with the knowledge of what she had done, and the knowledge of why, and the gap between the two, which was the gap where grief lived. The timer ran. She stopped. She made a note. Wendell and Monica Wilkins. Dentists, Cairns, Australia, restoration sequence, Alpha 7 modified legitimacy approach, requires personal presence, takes approximately 45 minutes per subject. Both restorable when safe. She closed the notebook. They were safe. She had made sure of it. That was enough. It had to be enough. She also negotiated with the goblins, not in the way the books later described it, not as the heist it was, the audacious vault robbery of Gringotts, which was real and which she was proud of in a complicated way. But before the heist, the preparation, she had gone to Gringotts 3 months before the battle, alone, using a disguise she had designed herself, not Polyjuice, which required ingredients and time, but a glamour so complete that even Griphook wouldn't have recognized her. She had gone to request a meeting with a senior account manager, not about the Lestrange Vault specifically, about the state of things generally. The conversation was, by goblin standards, extraordinary. She spoke Gobbledyggook. She had taught herself from a text in the Hogwarts library. In the months when she was learning everything she could think of to learn, and her accent was imperfect but her grammar was precise, and goblin culture valued precision above almost all other things, the account manager had looked at her for a long moment. Then, spoken back in gobbledygook, slower than usual, "The way you speak to a student who is technically correct but clearly working hard," she said. "I know about the Horcrux in the Lestrange Vault. I know what it is and what it does. When the war is over, it will need to be destroyed, and the destruction will need to happen in conditions that don't involve a full break-in. I am prepared to offer something in return for cooperation. What could you offer?" "My word," Hermione said, "and a specific political commitment. When the war is over, I intend to work in the ministry, in the highest position I can reach. And the first major initiative of that career will be a comprehensive review of the Werewolf Code of Conduct, the Being-Creature Classification System, and the specific restrictions on goblin banking rights that have been in place since 1752. The goblin looked at her for a long time. "These are very large promises from a person whose identity I cannot confirm. No. They're promises from a person whose face I've chosen to show you in circumstances where you could, if you chose, tell the Death Eaters who currently control this institution that a young witch of non-standard description just attempted to negotiate over Horcruxes. You're not going to do that, because you're a banker, and bankers don't burn bridges with people who are going to win." A pause. A very long pause. "And if you don't win? Then none of this matters, and you lose nothing. But if I do," she held the goblin's gaze, "you will want to have been on the right side of this conversation." Griphook was not in the meeting. But word reached Griphook. And when Harry and Ron and Hermione came to Gringotts with Bellatrix Lestrange's appearance and a desperate plan, Griphook's cooperation, while not freely given, was real. Real in ways that the books attributed entirely to other reasons. The ministry reforms happened. The classification review happened. It took 8 years, and the resistance was significant, and Hermione did not manage to fix everything. But she started. 7th year. The tent. November. Ron gone. The locket swinging. The empty camp. Harry sat by the fire and stared at nothing, and Hermione made tea and prepared food and maintained the wards and researched and kept the structure together, because structure was the thing that remained when everything else was subtracted. She was not fine. She had not been fine since the summer. But fine was a description she reserved for small things, conversations that went smoothly, problems that resolved efficiently. The large things required a different vocabulary. Functional, effective, present, moving, she moved. One evening, when Harry was asleep and the fire was low, she took out the notebook with the 10-minute grief entries. Flipped through it. The entries were regular, precise, dated, her parents, Dumbledore, the structure of the life she had been living, reduced to a diary of 10-minute allowances for feeling the reduction. She was 16 years old. She closed the notebook. Then she opened it again to a fresh page and wrote, "I am doing this correctly. The strategy is right. The preparation was right. The obliviate was right. The research is right, but I have not asked myself whether it is also the best that can be done, or merely the best I could conceive of. Those are different questions. I should ask them more often." She sat with that for a while. Note, the willingness to question your own strategy is not weakness. It is the thing that separates effective strategy from inflexible strategy. Inflexible strategy fails when the world changes. Effective strategy recalibrates. I am recalibrating. Constantly, that is not a flaw. Also, I miss Ron. This is not useful information, but it is true information, and true information belongs in the record regardless of utility. She put the notebook away. made more tea. Neville Longbottom's role in the war. Hermione thought about Neville often, in the months before the battle. Not with strategic calculation. Neville was not a piece she was moving. He was a person she was thinking about with the specific quality of attention she reserved for people who were becoming more than she had expected. She had underestimated Neville. Not dramatically, she had never thought poorly of him, but she had categorized him as kind and clumsy early in their acquaintance. And the categorization had been sticky in the way that early categorizations are sticky, remaining in the model even as the evidence accumulated that it was incomplete. The evidence: Neville had stood up to the trio in first year, citing the importance of rules, and had been awarded 10 points by Dumbledore for the courage of that stand. Small, but signal. Neville had faced a boggart that looked like Professor Snape. Neville had learned the impediment jinx faster than Ron. Neville had fought in the Department of Mysteries and had held on with a broken nose, because breaking would have meant Ron stayed trapped, and Ron staying trapped was unacceptable. Neville Longbottom had been building towards something the entire time. She had not seen it because she was looking at the output. The clumsiness, the nervousness, the broken cauldrons, rather than the architecture underneath. The architecture was courage. The slow, patient, Hufflepuff in Gryffindor robes, courage of someone who was afraid of almost everything and who kept doing things anyway. In the battle, it was Neville who killed Nagini. Not heroically, not with a dramatic speech or a moment of triumphant catharsis. He did it because the snake needed to be killed, and he was the person holding the sword, and the moment presented itself, and he acted. He acted because the fear was there, and the action was also there, and in Neville Longbottom the action had always been louder than the fear. She told him afterward. In the Great Hall, in the immediate chaotic aftermath, when the living were finding each other. "You saved everything," Hermione said. Neville looked at her. His face was bloody, his robes were destroyed. He was holding the sword and looking at it with the expression of someone who cannot quite believe what they are holding. She was there, and you've been building toward that your entire life. Every time you stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. Every time you held on when letting go was available. You built toward that. Neville looked at her. "You're very formal when you're being kind." "I know. It's a flaw I'm working on." "Don't," Neville said. "It sounds like you." He looked back at the sword. "Hermione?" "Yes?" "She was a Horcrux." "Yes, and it's over now. It's over." He nodded. Once, the nod of someone absorbing a fact that is too large to hold all at once and who is choosing to receive it in increments. "Right," Neville said, and went to find his friends. Draco Malfoy. The reconciliation that wasn't one, because it didn't need to be. They met at the Ministry, 11 months after the battle. He was there for a deposition. She was there because she was always there. The Ministry corridor, the same one she would work in for 30 years, with the portraits on the walls and the particular institutional smell of polished stone and old parchment. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The history between them was compressed into that moment. The word he had called her, mudblood, first time in second year, and the way it had landed, the way that word always landed on the people it was aimed at, like a physical blow designed to establish hierarchy. The years after, when she was in his house and the hierarchy was complicated by proximity, the way the word had receded, gradually, as she had made herself so indisputably present that removing the presence would have cost him more than maintaining it. "Granger," he said. "Malfoy, you're working at the Ministry. For now. Other plans later. Of course you have other plans." He looked at her, the grey eyes, older now, carrying the specific weight of having been on the wrong side and having to live with that. "I owe you an apology. You owe me several. I know. The word," it said. "You can't unsay it. But the apology is noted. He stopped, started again. I expected more. More what? More anger. More, he made a gesture that she interpreted as more of what Gryffindors do. I processed the anger at the time, Hermione said. I'm not carrying it forward. That would be inefficient. You processed. I've been in Slytherin for 7 years, Malfoy. I don't hold grudges. I hold information. And the information I have about you is that you were a frightened child who was handed ideology before you had the tools to evaluate it, and who made choices accordingly, and who spent the last 3 years of school making different choices when the cost of different choices became clear. The trajectory matters. He was quiet. You were terrible to me, Hermione said, for years. And then you were complicated. And then you were, she paused. Ultimately on the right side. Barely still counts. That's generous. It's accurate. Generous would be pretending the terrible years didn't happen. Accurate is acknowledging them and also acknowledging what came after. Both things are true. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. The house respected you, he said, more than it respected anyone in my year, more than it respected me, and I was born to it. I earned it. I know. That was my point. He paused. The pure blood ideology says that some people are born to things. You demonstrated systematically for 7 years that the ideology is wrong. You didn't argue with it. You didn't protest it. You just kept being better than it could account for. That was the plan. It worked. Yes, he nodded. The conversation was over. He walked past her, down the corridor. She watched him go. Then she turned and went to work. The restoration of her parents. She did it in August, 1 year after the battle, in a house in Cairns. She had scheduled it, planned it, prepared the counter-sequence. Travelled to Australia alone, which felt right. This was not a thing to share, not because of secrecy, but because some things are private in a way that does not benefit from witness. Wendell and Monica Wilkins were having breakfast when she knocked on the door. Her mother opened it, looked at her. The face that Hermione had not seen in a year, the face she had been holding in memory with the specific, deliberate care of someone who knows that the memory needs to last. "Can I help you?" her mother said. "Yes," Hermione said. "I need you to sit down." She cast the counter sequence. 45 minutes per subject. Precise, controlled, the memories returning in the order she had designed. Early memories first, building the foundation before adding the recent layers so that the structure could support the weight. Her father remembered Hermione when she was 4, asking why the sky was blue. Her mother remembered Hermione at 7, reading in the garden. Both of them remembered, slowly, incrementally, the entire life that Hermione had removed to protect them. When it was done, her mother looked at her for a long moment. "How long?" her mother asked. "A year. You came back, as soon as it was safe." Her mother reached across the table, took her hand, held it. "Are you all right?" her mother asked. Hermione opened her mouth to say yes. Closed it. "Not entirely," she said. "What do you need?" She thought about it. About the tent and the locket and the cold and the research and the 10-minute grief sessions and the battle and the aftermath and the 11 months of ministry work and the careful, relentless, exhausting process of rebuilding a world that had burned. "Biscuits," Hermione said. "And to sit here for a while." Her mother made tea. Her father got the biscuits. They sat in the kitchen in Cairns, the 3 of them, with the Australian sun coming through the window and the world outside continuing its business. Hermione sat in her mother's kitchen and drank tea, and for a while, just for a while, she did not plan anything. It was, she decided, the most Slytherin thing she had ever done, because knowing when to stop was also a strategy. Knowing when to rest was also preparation. knowing when to receive rather than deploy, when to sit in a kitchen in a foreign country and let someone else make the tea, was the hardest skill she had learned in 7 years of a house that valued the active over the passive. She had learnt it eventually, better than never. The conversation that happened only once, and that mattered more than most. Late in 5th year. The room of requirement. 2 in the morning. Harry, practicing the Patronus charm. Hermione, ostensibly helping him practice, but actually thinking about the Horcrux research she had been conducting for 7 months without telling anyone. Expecto Patronum, Harry said. The stag materialized, silver, enormous, circling the room with the contained energy of something that wanted more space than was available. Hermione watched it. When do you know? Harry asked. Know what? When the moment is right. For doing something. You always wait. You always let things develop. How do you know when it's time to act? Hermione considered this. The stag circled. The silver light touched the walls. There's a feeling, she said. It's not certainty. Certainty is rarely available. It's a threshold. When the information I have is sufficient to support the decision I need to make, and when the cost of waiting begins to exceed the cost of acting. That sounds very calculated. It is. Doesn't it feel like anything? It feels like pressure, like something has been building and has reached the point where it's ready, like a potion that's been brewing and has hit the right temperature. She paused. Actually, it feels like your Patronus. When you're about to cast it correctly, you can feel it. There's a warmth, a sense that the magic is ready. Acting at the right moment feels like that. A warmth, a readiness. Harry looked at her. I didn't know you thought about it that way. I don't usually say it out loud. It sounds too, she searched for the word, imprecise. For me. But it's true? It's true. The thinking is the Slytherin part. The warmth is the part that doesn't come from Slytherin. She looked at the stag. It comes from this. From the Patronus? From what makes the Patronus possible? The memory, the feeling, the part that can't be calculated. Harry was quiet for a moment. The stag circled. The room was warm with silver light. You'd have been good in Gryffindor, Harry said. Yes, but you're better here. Yes, is that hard to admit? No, Hermione said. It used to be. I used to feel like choosing Slytherin was choosing something darker than myself. Now I understand that the house doesn't choose the person. The person fills the house. And I filled it with, she looked at the stag, the light, the warmth that had no room in a potions formula, with this. With all of it, the thinking and the feeling both. Then maybe, Harry said, Slytherin needed someone like you. Maybe, Hermione said. Or maybe I needed something like Slytherin. She stood. Again, the Patronus. The grip is too tight on the upswing. Harry laughed. Even at 2 in the morning. Precision doesn't have a curfew. He cast it again. The stag blazed. She watched it, and in the silver light she thought, yes, both things. The thinking and the warmth. The patience and the readiness. The house that shaped me and the person I was before it. Both things. That was the answer. Both things, always. The Slytherin and the Hermione, indistinguishable, inseparable, the most powerful combination in the room. There are more threads, the ones that connect the stories beginning to its end. Snape and Hermione. The relationship that was not a mentorship, not a friendship, not the kind of relationship that has a clean name, because Snape and Hermione were both the kind of people who resisted clean names. She had gone to him in 1st year with the Quirrell information. She had gone to him in 2nd year when she needed his expertise on basilisk venom antidotes, specifically whether a variant of bezoar-based compound could accelerate recovery from petrification for patients who were already partially healed. He had given her the answer. Precisely, without commentary on the fact that she was 12 and asking questions that most adults would not know to ask. She had gone to him in third year to ask whether the Patronus Charms mechanism could be adapted for use without a wand in an emergency situation. He had said no. Then, after a pause, had said, however, the wandless intention that underlines emergency magic can be directed through an object if the object is sufficiently saturated with the caster's magical signature. A wand carried for years would qualify, as would a ring. A piece of jewellery worn constantly. She had gone home for Christmas and had cast the Patronus into a ring. It hadn't worked as a permanent vessel. The magic dissipated within hours. But the attempt had taught her 3 things about soul-depth intention that she later used in the coin charm design for the Dar. She had told Snape about this, years later. He had looked at her for a moment. You used my suggestion for something other than its intended purpose. Yes, and the result was an improved version of the enchantment. Yes, I see. He picked up his quill. You may go. That's it? What else would you like? I expected more. You expected to be acknowledged. I acknowledge you. Your adaptation was competent. The deviation from the intended purpose was characteristic and, in this instance, productive characteristic, Hermione said. You take information and recombine it into configurations its source did not anticipate. This is either a flaw or a talent. In your case, a talent. In most cases, a flaw. The difference is precision. That's the closest thing to a compliment I've heard from you. It is not a compliment. It is an assessment. An accurate one? Obviously, I don't make inaccurate assessments. She looked at him. You're the reason I stayed in Slytherin. He looked up. The expression was the controlled one, no information leaking. But the posture shifted. Minutely, I didn't make that decision. No. But after the Quirrell conversation, after you listened and took it seriously and sent me back through the right passage so I wouldn't get caught, I understood what Slytherin was supposed to be. Not what it was supposed to be. A house where rigour was valued, where intelligence was not a liability, where the question behind the question was the real question. The house frequently fails to live up to that description. Most things fail to live up to their descriptions. That's not a reason to abandon the description. Snape was quiet. You modelled it, Hermione said. Not intentionally. Not to me specifically. But when I watched you teach, when I watched you respond to competence rather than to familiarity, I understood what the house could be for someone like me. What it could offer. I would not recommend using me as a model. You do not get to decide what I use as a model, Professor. You get to provide the model. I decide what to do with it. Another pause. Longer. You are 23 years old, Snape said. You have been arguing with me since you were 11. I've been precise with you since I was 11. The arguing is a subset of precision. The distinction is noted. He returned to his quill. Close the door on your way out. She closed the door. In the corridor, she allowed herself the small smile, the private one, the one that was hers and only hers. The ministry years, in brief. Year 1, junior position. Magical law enforcement. She restructured the evidence classification system, which had not been updated since 1923, in her first 3 months. Her supervisor filed a formal commendation and a private complaint simultaneously. The commendation was processed first. This was, she noted, information about the institutional culture that would be useful going forward. Year 2, she fought the blood status amendment, 43 pages. The amendment was withdrawn. Year 3, senior analyst, Department of Magical Cooperation. She led the first comprehensive review of the International Statute of Secrecy since 1965. The review took 2 years and produced 97 recommendations, 43 of which were implemented. Year 7, head of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. She did not stay long, The scope was too narrow, but the creature classification reform she initiated in those 2 years rewrote the legal standing of more than 30 species, including the goblin banking rights revision she had promised in Cairns. Year 12. Deputy Minister for Magic, under Kingsley Shacklebolt, who was the best political superior she had ever worked for because he understood that his role was to provide Hermione with authority and then get out of the way. Year 15. Minister for Magic. The acceptance speech contained no flourishes. It was precise, structured, specific about objectives, with a clear statement of the values that would guide decision-making, and a realistic assessment of the obstacles ahead. "I have been told," Hermione said at the end of the speech, "that I should end with something inspirational. Something that makes the assembled Wizengamot feel the weight and the possibility of this moment." He paused, looked at the room. "I would like to propose instead a standard. The standard is this. Every policy, every decision, every choice made in this ministry will be evaluated against a single question. Does this serve the people it claims to serve? All of them. Not just the ones who look like the people who have traditionally held power. All of them." Another pause. "If the answer is no, we change the policy. We change the decision. We change ourselves. That is not inspiration. That is methodology." The room applauded. Eventually, with the specific quality of applause from a room that is not sure it wanted to applaud but is doing it anyway because the logic was sound, she accepted the applause precisely. Then went to work. The last thing. The thing that the story needs. Ron proposed on a Tuesday. This was perfect. Neither romantic nor unexpected, but Tuesday, the most ordinary day of the week, which was entirely appropriate for a proposal from Ron Weasley, who had always been most himself in the ordinary moments. He asked her at dinner, in the kitchen of the flat they had been sharing for 2 years, the flat that was organised in the way that their shared life was organised, her section of the bookshelf precise, his section enthusiastic, the middle section a negotiated territory that changed monthly, and that was, Hermione had decided, the most accurate map of their relationship available. They had furnished the flat together. This had been, against all reasonable expectation, simple, not because they agreed on everything. They did not. And the debates about whether the bookshelf should be organised by subject or alphabetically had lasted 3 weeks and had eventually been resolved by subject, with alphabetical within subject, who had pointed out that locating a specific book required the information in that order, not the other. But because they had approached furnishing the flat the way they approached everything that mattered, with the understanding that the other person's perspective was worth taking seriously, even when it was wrong, because it was often more right than it first appeared. Ron had been right about the alphabetical within subject compromise. She had noted this, had added it to the model. "I have a question," Ron said. "Yes," Hermione said, without looking up from her notes. "You don't know what I'm going to ask." "Yes, I do." "You're not, Ron, looking at me." She looked up. He was holding a ring. Not an elaborate ring. They had had a conversation about rings the previous March, which he had not realised at the time was a conversation about rings, but which she had recognised as a conversation about rings, and which she had treated accordingly, providing the relevant information with the specific nonchalance of someone who is not nonchalant at all. The ring was simple. Gold, with a small sapphire. "You found the sapphire option," Hermione said, after 17 jewellery shops and a recommendation from Ginny and one truly unhelpful visit to a goblin-run gemstone merchant who took exception to my gobbledygook pronunciation. "Your pronunciation is improving. It is not improving. It is consistently terrible, and you are being kind. I'm being accurate. It's improving from a very low baseline. Hermione, yes, will you marry me?" Not a question. Not quite. The particular Ron phrasing of a question that already knew its answer, phrased as a statement, because the answer was so certain that the question mark felt like doubt, and there was no doubt. Yes, Hermione said. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it. The sapphire. She had said, in March, that she found sapphires more interesting than diamonds from a crystalline structure perspective, and that if someone were ever to get her a ring, which she was not expecting or requiring, the sapphire would be the correct gemstone. She looked at the ring. The sapphire. She had said, in March, that she found sapphires more interesting than diamonds from a crystalline structure perspective. She had said this in a conversation about wandcraft gemstones that had been simultaneously a different conversation entirely. Ron had been listening in the Ron way, apparently tracking Quidditch scores, actually tracking her, and she had known he was listening and had let the information sit where it could be found. The ring was the evidence that he had found it. You listened, she said. I always listen to you. Not always. More often than I get credit for. That is also accurate. She looked at the ring. At the kitchen, at the man across from her who had been her person since the moment in a bathroom when he'd come back for her, who had been her person through the chess game and the basilisk and the Horcruxes and the tent and the years after. Ron. Yes? Thank you. For listening. For staying. For being the person who always comes back. Well, Ron said, he was red in the face in the way that he went red in the face when he was feeling too much and trying not to show it. You're the person who always knows what to do. Someone has to come back for you. You make that sound like strategy. Maybe it is. I am, according to you, very strategically underestimated. You are. Then maybe I've been strategically staying with you this whole time. Is that true? He grinned. The Ron grin. The one that broke everything open. Not even a little bit, he said. I just love you. She stood up. Across the kitchen. Took his face in her hands. That, Hermione Granger said, is the most strategic thing you could possibly have said. She kissed him. The kitchen smelled like dinner, and the flat smelled like both of them, and outside the window the ordinary Tuesday evening was continuing its ordinary business, entirely indifferent to the fact that the most important decision of two people's lives was being made at a kitchen table over slightly cold pasta. The ordinary moments. The load-bearing ones. The ones that made everything else possible. She had known this since first year, since the cold spot near the dormitory door, since the warming charm she had cast on her first night. The small things were the structure, the conversation about sapphires that was also a conversation about rings, the warming charm on the first night that was also permission to make the place hers, the 10 minutes of grief in the tent that were also preparation for the next 10 hours of work, the 43 pages of analysis that were also a statement, made clearly in the language the institution understood, about who she was and what she was capable of. Every small thing was a statement. Every precise action communicated something about the person taking it. She had learnt this in Slytherin, that the way you occupied a space communicated your relationship to the space, that the Hermione who cast the warming charm and adjusted the books and sat in the cold with her back to the wall was telling the house who she was before she said a word. She had been telling the world who she was since before she could articulate it. The house had simply given her the language to do it clearly. And the structure held. One more. The one the story has been building toward. The one that explains why the sorting hat was right. The second year in the ministry, when she was junior, when she was learning how the institution actually functioned beneath its formal surface, she was called into a meeting about blood status classifications. Not asked. Called, the way that junior employees are called into meetings they did not request, on matters they did not choose, by people who assumed that their presence would produce a particular result. The meeting was attended by 3 senior officials. All pure blood. all male. All of them carrying the specific confidence of people who had held power for so long that they had forgotten it required maintenance. The matter was a proposed amendment to the Employment Equality Charter that would have introduced new language around magical heritage criteria, which was, transparently, blood status discrimination with a different name. The senior official who had called her into the meeting smiled when she entered. "Miss Granger, we thought you'd want to weigh in on this, given your particular perspective." Her particular perspective. The Muggle-born perspective. The perspective that they thought they were managing by including her in the room and that they expected to be manageable. Hermione sat down. She had known this meeting was coming, had in fact known about the amendment before it was proposed, through channels she preferred not to document. Had spent the preceding week preparing. "I'd be happy to weigh in," she said. "I've prepared an analysis." She placed 43 pages of analysis on the table. The senior official looked at the analysis, looked at her, looked at the analysis again. "This is comprehensive," Hermione said. "Yes, Section 1 covers the legislative history of blood status classification in ministry employment, going back to 1689. Section 2 presents the comparative data on outcomes for Muggle-born employees under various policy regimes, including the Umbridge-era amendments that you'll recall were later declared invalid by the Wizengamot. Section 3 addresses the specific language of the proposed amendment and maps it against 17 historical precedents that were subsequently reversed. Section 4 is my recommendation." A pause. "Which is?" "Not to proceed. The amendment is legally vulnerable, historically unprecedented in contexts where it survived review, and politically counterproductive. I have identified 9 Wizengamot members who would oppose it on the basis of Section 3 alone, and 3 of them chair committees that oversee your departments." Silent. "Additionally," Hermione said, "I have consulted with Kingsley Shacklebolt, who has indicated that the amendment would conflict with his current legislative agenda and who asked me to convey his interest in discussing alternative approaches to whatever underlying concern prompted this." More silence. "The underlying concern," said one of the officials, carefully, is about workforce standards," Hermione said. "I know. And I am happy to discuss workforce standards at length. I have 14 pages on that, specifically in Section 2. He looked at the official directly. "But we both understand that the language of this amendment goes beyond workforce standards. And I would rather have the real conversation than the nominal one, because the nominal one wastes both our time, and I am constitutionally opposed to waste." The meeting lasted another 30 minutes. The amendment was not proceeded with. Afterward, in the corridor, one of the officials, the one who had been quiet throughout, the one she had assessed as uncertain rather than opposed, stopped her. "You prepared for a week," he said. "Yes. For a meeting that should have taken 15 minutes to shut down. If I want it shut down permanently, I need the arguments to be comprehensive. A quick dismissal gets reconsidered. A 43-page analysis gets filed and cited and becomes the institutional record." He looked at her. "You're building a record." "I'm always building a record." "Records outlast the people who made them. That's very long-term thinking." "I'm a patient person," Hermione said. "I learned it from Slytherin." He nodded, slowly. "I graduated from Hufflepuff," he said. "We value patience too." "I know. Which is why I noted you as a potential ally rather than opposition." He paused. "Would you be available for tea next week?" He was. And he became, over the following 10 years, one of the most effective members of her policy coalition, not because she had recruited him, but because they had, over tea, recognized in each other the same fundamental commitment to the thing the ministry was supposed to be rather than the thing it had become. This was the Slytherin part. The patient building of alliances, the recognition that change does not come from shouting, but from the accumulation of people who quietly agree and who wait for the right moment to agree loudly. The Gryffindor part was the 43 pages. The research. The preparation so complete that opposition became untenable. The willingness to walk into a room where she was not wanted, and to be so thoroughly, exhaustively, undeniably right that the room changed. Both parts, always both. There is a question at the centre of this story. Not the question the Sorting Hat asked. That question was simple. The question of which house, the binary of Gryffindor versus Slytherin. The question at the centre is harder. What does it mean to belong somewhere that was not made for you? Slytherin was not made for Muggle-borns. Its founder said so clearly, his view embedded in the stone of the school, in the chamber he built and the monster he stored there. Slytherin was a house designed for the people Salazar Slytherin valued, the pure blood, the magical heritage, the aristocracy of blood. Hermione Granger entered that house and did not belong. And then she did. Not because the house changed to accommodate her. The house changed slowly, over years. But the change was the result of her presence, not the prerequisite for it. She belonged because she decided to belong. Because she brought herself into the space, fully and precisely and without apology, and occupied it with such complete commitment that the space reorganized itself around her. This is the Slytherin lesson, distilled to its essential form. Not ambition. Ambition is easy. Ambition is wanting. The lesson is agency. The understanding that belonging is not something granted to you. It is something you build. With preparation and patience and the willingness to be wrong and the discipline to correct and the capacity to maintain both the thinking and the warmth simultaneously. Hermione Granger was Slytherin because she was the person who understood that the work never stops. That the preparation leads to the action, leads to the preparation, leads to the action, endlessly. Because the world does not stabilize. And the problems do not resolve, and the need does not cease. She was Slytherin, because she was, at her core, a person who intended to still be standing. And she was. She always was. Because she had prepared. Because she had been patient. Because she had understood, from the first night in the cold spot near the dormitory door, that the work is the point, and the preparation is the work, and the work does not stop. Because she had been shaped by a house that expected her to fail, and had turned that expectation into the clearest possible motivation. Because she had loved. Precisely, structurally, load-bearingly. Harry, who ran toward the impossible. Ron, who always came back. Daphne, who had been the first to see her. Snape, who had modelled the things she needed without intending to, her parents, who had made the tea. Because she had not been afraid to be wrong, had not been afraid to be corrected, had not been afraid to sit in the cold and cast the warming charm and start again. Because belonging is not something given, it is something built. And Hermione Granger had spent her life building. The structure held. The morning came. She was standing, the portrait in the common room, speaking again, years later, to a new first year, a Muggle-born girl with wide eyes who had been sorted into Slytherin and who was standing in the common room at 2 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. "It's cold here," the girl said, to no one in particular. "Near the door?" "Yes," the portrait said. "There's a warming charm." Chapter 2 of the Practical Household Spellbook. Cast it precisely, the intention matters as much as the incantation. The girl looked at the portrait. "Are you the minister, Granger?" "I was the minister. Now I'm the portrait." "Were you scared when you were sorted here?" The portrait considered this. The expression was the private one, the one that meant she was being honest. "I wasn't scared," the portrait said. "I was informed. I knew it would be difficult. I knew the house would test me. I chose it anyway because the difficulty was the point." "What do you mean?" I mean that easy paths don't build the tools you need for hard destinations. The house is hard. The house requires you to be precise and patient and always thinking 3 moves ahead, and those are exactly the tools you need for the world outside the house. The portrait looked at the girl. You were sorted here for a reason. Not the reason the old ideology would give. The real reason. What's the real reason? Because you have something that most people don't notice in you yet. And this house is where it will be noticed. And where it will be used. The girl looked at the portrait for a long moment. How do you know? Because I was you, the portrait said. 70 years ago, in this room with this drought, without a warming charm, I was exactly you. And I turned out, a pause, the small smile, the private one, adequately? Adequately? The portrait in the entry hall is 30 feet tall. I find excessive. The girl laughed, the laugh of someone who needed to laugh and has found the permission to do so. Cast the charm, the portrait said. Then sleep. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your education. The girl cast the charm, went to bed. The portrait watched the common room settle into the particular quiet of a sleeping house, the green light of the lake. The ancient walls, the door with the drought coming under it, steady and cold, which the warming charm could address but not eliminate. Some droughts are structural. Some things cannot be fully fixed. You account for them. You prepare. You cast the warming charm, and you go to sleep, and in the morning you do the work. That was the lesson. The whole lesson. The one that took a lifetime to learn and that could be stated in 6 words. Prepare. Be patient. Do the work. Slytherin's lesson. Hermione's lesson. The only lesson that had ever mattered. The portrait rested. The castle breathed. The fire burned low. And somewhere in the castle, a girl with bushy hair and wide eyes was falling asleep in the cold spot near the door, warm enough, thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow, when the preparation would continue. When the patience would be tested. When the work would begin again. Tomorrow, which was the whole point. It was always the point.